The sound between us, the thing about Puget Sound, is that it looks calm. Ferry commuters see flat water and city skylines and think it's just a big lake you cross twice a day, but underneath that surface there are currents and depth and cold that will kill you in 15 minutes if you go in unprepared. Learned that at 26 when I was second mate on the ferry Spokane and we had a passenger fall overboard during a winter storm. Coast Guard got there in 12 minutes, but the water was 43 degrees and the man had been under for 8. They pulled him out. Did CPR for 40 minutes. He didn't make it. 5 years later, I'm captain of the ferry Tacoma, running the Seattle-Bainbridge route 6 days a week, and I still think about that passenger every time the weather turns bad. My name is Owen Mercer, born in Bremerton, third-generation maritime family, the kind of people who understand boats the way some families understand farming. Got my mate's license at 23, captain at 29, youngest ferry captain in Washington State Ferry System history. I move 1,200 passengers a day across Puget Sound. Commuters, tourists, people who trust me to get them home safe. Most days I do exactly that. Some days I remember the one who didn't make it and wonder if I could have done something different. This particular morning, November 6:15 a.m., 48 degrees and raining sideways, I was bringing the Tacoma into the Seattle terminal when my first mate radioed from the car deck. "Captain, we've got a situation. Passenger report seeing someone go over the rail on the port side aft section. Possible person in the water. My blood went ice. Sound general alarm. All crew to emergency stations. I'm executing man overboard protocols. The next 90 seconds were pure training. Full reverse engines. Mark the position. Deploy life rings. Get a visual count of remaining passengers. Radio Coast Guard for CR coordination. The choreography you drill for years hoping you never have to use it. I got on the PA. This is the captain. We have a possible person overboard. All passengers remain in your current location. Do not approach the rails. Coast Guard has been notified and is en route." Through the bridge windows, I could see the water. Gray, choppy, 43 degrees, according to my instruments. If someone was in that water, we had maybe 15 minutes before hypothermia became fatal. My radio cracked. "Ferry Tacoma, this is Coast Guard Air Station Port Angeles. We have your man overboard call. Jayhawk helicopter is launching now. ETA 7 minutes. Can you maintain position and visual on the victim? Coast Guard negative visual on victim. Last seen position marked. Current conditions are 3-foot seas, 20-knot winds, heavy rain. Visibility is poor. Copy. Our rescue swimmer will be ready for immediate deployment. Stand by. 7 minutes felt like 7 hours. My crew deployed searchlights, scanning the water. Passengers were crowding windows despite my PA instructions. The ferry rocked in the wind and current, engines working to hold position. At minute 6, my lookout. "Captain, I have visual." "Port side 30 yards, I see someone in the water." I grabbed binoculars. There, a person, barely visible, bright orange life jacket keeping them at surface but clearly in distress, waves washing over their head. "Coast Guard, we have visual." Victim is afloat with life jacket, appears conscious but in distress. Marked position transmitting now. Ferry Tacoma, Jayhawk inbound. Visual on your vessel. We're setting up for swimmer deployment. I looked up and saw it. Orange and white Coast Guard helicopter coming in fast and low, rotors beating against wind and rain. The side door was already open. Someone visible in the doorway rigged in a harness and wetsuit. The helicopter positioned directly over the victim. The rescue swimmer dropped, smooth, controlled, hitting the water maybe 10 feet from the person in distress. Within seconds, he was swimming toward them, moving with the kind of efficiency that comes from years of training and hundreds of rescues. I watched through binoculars as he reached the victim, assessed them, deployed a rescue harness, saw him signal to the helicopter, saw the hoist line come down. He secured the victim, gave the signal, and they started going up, victim first, wrapped in the rescue swimmer's arms, both of them spinning slowly as the helicopter pulled them out of Puget Sound. They cleared the water. The helicopter pivoted, started moving toward shore for emergency medical response. My radio. Ferry Tacoma Coast Guard. Victim is secured and being transported to Harborview Medical Center. You're cleared to resume normal operations. Well done on the rapid response and position marking. Thank you, Coast Guard. Appreciate the quick response. I secured the scene, completed safety checks, resumed the crossing to Seattle. But I couldn't stop seeing that rescue swimmer drop into 43-degree water like it was nothing, swim through 3-foot seas like they were calm, execute a textbook rescue under terrible conditions. That kind of competence, that specific expertise, it stayed with you. 3 days later, I got a call from Coast Guard Air Station Port Angeles. Captain Mercer? This is Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen, Operations Officer for Air Station Port Angeles. Our rescue swimmer from your man overboard case wanted to follow up. He has some questions about ferry emergency procedures. Would you have time for a call? Of course. Put him through, the line clicked. Captain Mercer? This is Petty Officer Jesse Tran, rescue swimmer. I was the AST who pulled your passenger last Tuesday. His voice was warm, professional, with the specific confidence of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Petty Officer Tran. I watched your rescue. That was exceptional work under difficult conditions. Thank you, sir. But actually, I wanted to thank you. Your crew's position marking was perfect. We flew straight to the victim because your coordinates were exact. That saved critical time. He paused. I also wanted to ask, what's your protocol for life jacket deployment on the car deck? I'm working on a training presentation about ferry emergencies, and I want to make sure I'm representing your procedures accurately. Most rescue swimmers didn't follow up on cases, didn't call ferry captains to verify procedures, didn't care about accuracy in training presentations. Our life jackets are stored in emergency lockers every 50 feet along the car deck rails. Crew members are trained to deploy immediately upon man overboard alarm. We also have ring buoys on quick release mounts. I found myself adding, but honestly, passengers going over the rail is rare. We have extensive safety measures, I know. I've studied ferry safety protocols. Your systems are good. His voice got slightly less formal. Captain, this is going to sound forward, but I'm in Seattle this weekend for a training conference. Would you want to grab coffee? I'd like to hear more about ferry operations from someone who actually runs them, for professional development. My brain said this was maritime networking. My chest said something else entirely. Yeah, I'd like that. We met at a coffee shop in Pike Place Market on Saturday morning. Jesse showed up in civilian clothes, jeans, a gray Henley, looking less intense without the rescue swimmer gear. When he smiled, actually smiled, not the professional mask from emergency operations, it changed his whole face. Ferry captain, he greeted, handing me a coffee. Black with sugar. I guessed based on maritime professional stereotypes. I laughed. That's accurate. How'd you actually know? I asked the barista to watch what you ordered while I was in the bathroom. Seemed more reliable than guessing. He sat across from me. Jesse Tran, AST second class, 5 years Coast Guard, grew up in Tacoma. Owen Mercer, ferry captain for 2 years, mate for 7 before that. Born in Bremerton, never left Puget Sound. True Pacific Northwest. He wrapped his hands around his cup. So, ferry captain at 31. That's young for the position. Youngest in WSF history, actually. Got my captain's license early, had a mentor who pushed me, happened to be in the right place when they needed someone for the Tacoma. I studied him. 5 years Coast Guard, already an AST, that's fast too. I like water rescue. I'm good at it. Why waste time? He smiled. Tell me about ferry operations. What's the hardest part of the job? We talked for 3 hours. About maritime safety, rescue coordination, what it means to be responsible for hundreds of passengers every day. About growing up near water, him learning to swim in Puget Sound before he could walk, me growing up on my grandfather's fishing boat. About being queer in maritime professions, me coming out at 23 to a crew that mostly didn't care, him coming out in boot camp and having a chief who made sure anyone who had a problem got transferred. Why ferry captain? Jesse asked. You could do commercial shipping, make more money. Because ferries matter. They're how 50,000 people a day get to work, get home, live their lives. When a ferry breaks down, the whole region feels it. I leaned forward. Also, I like the routine. Same routes, same waters, predictable patterns. After a while, you know every current, every weather pattern, every quirk of the sound. That's the opposite of rescue swimming. Every call is different, every rescue is unique, nothing's predictable. Does that bother you? The unpredictability? No, that's why I love it. His expression shifted. Owen, can I tell you something? That rescue on Tuesday, that passenger had been in the water for 9 minutes when I got to them. Core temperature was dropping fast. They were maybe 3 minutes from losing consciousness. If your crew hadn't marked position perfectly, if we'd had to search, They wouldn't have made it. The weight in his voice, the narrow margin between rescue and recovery, I recognized it because I carried the same weight. They made it because you dropped into 43-degree water and pulled them out. I said, we both did our jobs. That's partnership. He met my eyes. Maritime operations work because ferry captains and Coast Guard coordinate. We're on the same team. Partnership, I agreed. When we walked out into Seattle rain, the kind of constant drizzle that defines the Pacific Northwest, Jesse stopped. Owen, can I ask you something personal? Sure. Are you seeing anyone? My heart kicked. No, work makes it complicated. Early shifts, rotating schedules. I'm responsible for a ferry and 1,200 passengers. Most people don't get why I care so much about a commuter boat. I get it. I work 24-hour SR rotations. I launch at 3 a.m. for rescues. I jump out of helicopters into water that can kill me. He stepped closer. My last relationship ended because he said I cared more about strangers in the water than him. Did you? Yeah, I did. No hesitation. But I'm trying to find someone who understands that rescue work matters, but so does... He gestured between us. So does this. This feels like something, I said carefully. It does. His hand found mine. Want to find out what? I kissed him there on a Seattle sidewalk in the rain, his hand coming to my jaw, mine to his waist. He tasted like coffee and possibility, and when we pulled apart, we were both grinning. That's a good start, Jesse murmured. Really good start, I agreed. But here's what I didn't know then. Jesse Tran wasn't just a rescue swimmer who was good at his job. He was the kind of person who volunteered for the hardest rescues, who dropped into storms when other swimmers said conditions were too dangerous, who carried the weight of every person he couldn't save and blamed himself for weather and waves and things outside any human's control, and I was about to spend the next 8 months learning exactly what that cost. The next 8 months were a study in building something real around impossible schedules. My ferry schedule was predictable but intense. Split shifts, early mornings, evening runs, 6 days a week moving thousands of people across the Sound. Jesse's SAR rotation was chaos. 24 hours on duty at the air station, ready to launch for any emergency, then 48 hours off that frequently got interrupted by major rescues. We made it work. He came to watch me bring the Tacoma into Bainbridge on a rare calm day, photographed the ferry from shore, asked questions about navigation. I visited the air station during a quiet period, watched him train in the pool, saw the level of fitness and skill required to be a rescue swimmer. We learned each other in pieces. Jesse made incredible pho from his Vietnamese grandmother's recipe. I could identify ferry engines by sound from a quarter mile away. He had a scar on his right shoulder from a rescue where a panicked victim fought him. I had a collection of maritime charts going back 3 generations. He was meticulous about rescue gear, every piece of equipment checked and rechecked, wetsuit maintained perfectly, nothing left to chance. I was the same with ferry systems, obsessive about maintenance logs and safety inspections. We fit together. 2 people who worked on Puget Sound, who understood water and weather and the specific danger of the Pacific Northwest's cold seas. You know what I thought the first time I saw you through binoculars? Jesse said one night, both of us in my Bremerton apartment watching ferries cross the Sound. That I was standing safely on a bridge while you were in the water? That too, he laughed. But also, that you were the most focused person I'd ever seen on a ferry bridge. The way you commanded your crew, the way you marked our position, the certainty in your radio calls. It was, he searched for words. It was really attractive. Very attractive. You thought I was attractive while you were hypothermic in Puget Sound? I wasn't hypothermic. I was wearing a dry suit, and I'm professionally acclimatized to cold water. He kissed my shoulder. Also, yes, I absolutely assessed your competence and attractiveness while pulling someone out of the Sound. I'm an excellent multitasker. That's a very specific skill. I'm a very specific person. He propped himself up. Owen, I really like this. Us. Even with my crazy schedule. I pulled him closer. I really like it too. We make the schedules work. We do, he agreed. But there were cracks I didn't see. Stress fractures forming under the surface like ice on water. Jesse took every rescue, every call, every emergency that came through the air station. He volunteered for the dangerous ones, the storm rescues, the cases where other swimmers said conditions were too risky. Worked his 24-hour rotations and then stayed longer if operations needed coverage. You need rest between rotations, I said after he'd been on duty for 36 straight hours responding to a fishing vessel sinking. I'm fine. Just tired. You're not fine. You worked a double shift and you're launching again tomorrow. Someone has to do it. We're short-staffed and people need help. Other swimmers can take calls, not like I can. I'm the most experienced AST at the station. If there's a difficult rescue, they need me. His hands were shaking slightly from exhaustion and adrenaline. I can't say no when people are dying. I recognized the pattern because I'd seen it in maritime accidents. People pushing past safe limits, insisting they were fine until suddenly they weren't. Jesse, I said carefully, you can't save everyone. I have to try, and there it was. The weight he'd been carrying since becoming a rescue swimmer, the breaking point came in late June. Jesse had been on a 72-hour rotation covering for swimmers on leave. 3 major rescues, a kayaker in trouble off the San Juans, a sailing emergency near Port Townsend, a diving accident that required a technical recovery. He'd slept maybe 8 hours total across 3 days. Then his pager went off at 11 p.m. I was at his place on his day off. Watched him check the alert. Watched his face change. Boat taking on water, 4 people aboard, children involved. They're launching now. He started pulling on his gear. Jesse, you just finished a 72-hour rotation. You're not physically ready. There are kids on that boat. Kids, Owen. I'm not sitting this out. You have other swimmers. I'm the most experienced. If it's a difficult extraction with children, they need me. He was moving on autopilot, checking equipment, grabbing his go bag. I have to do this. I wanted to physically stop him from leaving. But I understood duty, and I understood that when children are involved, saying no feels impossible. Be safe, I said instead. He kissed me, quick and distracted. Always am. He wasn't. The call came 4 hours later from the air station's operations officer. The rescue had been successful. All 4 people saved, including 2 children under 10. Boat sank, but everyone survived. But during the extraction, Jesse had made an error. Minor, caught immediately by his flight mechanic, but an error that shouldn't have happened. He'd miscalculated hoist timing while exhausted, nearly swung the rescue basket into the helicopter's fuselage. Coast Guard policy, mandatory stand down, fitness evaluation, meeting with flight operations and the station commander. I found him at his apartment at dawn, sitting on his deck staring at Puget Sound. Hey, I said softly, sitting beside him. I made a mistake. His voice was hollow. Hoist timing calculation. Nearly damaged the helicopter and endangered everyone aboard because I was too tired to do basic spatial assessment. I took his hand. What did Op say? Mandatory 72-hour rest before next rotation. Evaluation by flight surgeon. If it happens again, they'll ground me. He finally looked at me. Owen, I've never made a mistake like that. Not in 5 years. I've done hundreds of rescues exhausted and never, until now. Because even you have limits, his eyes filled. But what if someone needs me and I'm not there? Then someone else helps them. Your air station has other rescue swimmers. You have a team and backup and rotation systems. I shifted to face him.
Jesse, I love you.
I've loved you since you dropped out of a helicopter into 43-degree water like it was nothing. But watching you destroy yourself trying to respond to every emergency is killing me. You have to stop. I don't know how, he whispered. Then let me help you learn. I pulled him closer. You told me once that maritime operations work because ferries and Coast Guard coordinate. That we're on the same team. Same applies to your air station. You're part of a team, not solely responsible for every rescue. You have to trust your teammates and take care of yourself. What if someone dies because I wasn't there? Then it's not your fault. You're one swimmer in a system. You're excellent at what you do, but you can't be the only person who saves lives. That's too much weight for anyone, he broke then, quietly, face pressed to my shoulder, shaking with sobs he'd probably been holding since his first rescue. I held him. Let him cry, murmured the things I'd said to traumatized passengers. You're okay. You're safe. You did everything right. When he finally pulled back, his eyes were red but clearer. I'm scared, he admitted. If I step back, if I don't volunteer for every rescue, what if I become someone who stops caring? What if I lose the thing that makes me good at this? You won't. The thing that makes you good isn't working yourself to death. It's caring deeply and staying competent. You can do both. Care deeply and take care of yourself. I don't know how. We'll figure it out, together. I cupped his face. But Jesse, you have to try. You have to follow mandatory rest protocols and let others take shifts and trust that the system works without you carrying everything. Because if you burn out completely, you can't save anyone. Including yourself. Including us, he nodded. Okay, I'll try. 10 months later, recovery isn't linear. Neither is learning sustainable work practices, or finding balance or building a relationship with someone who's still learning. He doesn't have to be the hero every single time, but we made it work. Jesse returned to duty after medical clearance still. An exceptional rescue swimmer, but with enforced rotation limits. With teammates sharing the difficult calls. With a flight surgeon who monitored for overwork. Started seeing a therapist who specialized in first responder stress. Actually used his off rotations for rest instead of volunteering for extra shifts. I learned his patterns, the signs when he was taking on too much, the way his jaw tensed when he felt guilty for resting. Learned how to support without enabling, how to remind him that being part of a team meant trusting the team. He learned mine too. The way I got quiet before bad weather crossings, the protective instinct toward passengers that sometimes made me overly cautious. Learned how to pull me back when I was being too risk-averse, how to remind me that calculated risks were part of maritime operations. We built something steady. Something that flexed with storm seasons and rescue operations instead of breaking. One morning in September, perfect Pacific Northwest day, sun on the Sound, Mount Rainier visible. I woke to find Jesse on my deck watching ferries cross the water. You okay? I asked, wrapping arms around him from behind. Yeah, he leaned back into me. Just thinking. About that first rescue. About how your position marking saved critical minutes. About how we've been coordinating ever since. Your ferry routes, my rescue operations, sharing the Sound. He turned to look at me. Owen, I got asked to help develop a new Coast Guard training program. Maritime coordination with ferry systems, better protocols for man overboard on passenger vessels. They want my input because of my rescue experience. My chest felt full. That's amazing. It made me think about what you said. About being part of a team. About how good operations require partnership, not one person carrying everything. He smiled. I want your input too. Ferry captain perspective on what coordination actually helps. Make sure we're training swimmers to work with vessels, not just do solo heroics. Partnership, I said. Always. He kissed me there on the deck with September sun and ferry horns in the distance, and 10 months of learning each other behind us. Owen, I love you. I love that you understand the water, that you don't resent the rescues or the rotations, that you helped me learn I could be a good swimmer without sacrificing everything. I love you too, since I watched you drop into the Sound and execute a perfect rescue like you'd been doing it your whole life. I held him tighter. You're allowed to love the work and take care of yourself. They're not mutually exclusive. Neither are we, he murmured. 10 months after meeting during an emergency rescue, standing with a Coast Guard swimmer who saved lives and learning how to save his in return, I realized something. Some people spend their whole lives looking for someone who understands. Someone who gets that the work matters, but so does coming home. Someone who knows what it means to carry weight and when it's time to share the load. I found that person dropping out of a helicopter into cold water, then found him asking questions about ferry procedures because he cared about doing better, then found him every day after learning how to build something real. That's not a bad story. That's not bad at all.